How's it going, guys, and welcome back to BL3's Forgotten, a series where I take a look at underused and not often talked about pieces of gear to determine whether or not they deserve to be remembered within the modern meta of the game or should be left behind and forgotten. And today we are taking a look at the Breath of the Dying. If you'd like to farm the Breath of the Dying for yourself, you're going to want to fast travel over to Desolation's Edge over on Necrodefeo, specifically taking the drop pod fast travel. From there, you're going to carry on forward until you hit the Catch-A-Ride at the bottom of this hill where you can find a save station. This is where we'll be resetting from, and it is very convenient that this Catch-A-Ride is here as we do still have a little bit of a distance to go. Drive forward and make your way into this little clearing where you can find Blinding Banshee, who can drop the Breath of the Dying. The Breath of the Dying is a legendary Dahl assault rifle only able to roll in corrosive, but does have a 0% chance to cause a corrosive status effect. On kill, the Breath of the Dying will summon a ring of 13 orbs which will travel horizontally in all directions. These orbs deal corrosive and splash damage and deal 18 times the damage of the killing blow. The Breath of the Dying received one buff, but it was a fucking huge one, gaining 128% weapon damage and having the orbs damage increased from 6 times the killing blow to 12 times. Along with that, the orbs collision radius was increased to increase the chances of them hitting. And yes, there is a bit of a discrepancy here about the killing blow damage. On Loot Lemon, it lists it as 18 times the killing blow, but then in the changelog section, it says it went from 6 to 12. Based off my own experience, I do believe that it is actually 18 times, and that the wording in the changelog is just incorrect, and the multiplier actually was increased by 12, because, 12 and 6 is 18. But I left it as is and just did this little addendum because I don't actually know for certain. I tried to test it to the best of my ability, but it was inconsistent. But hey, if someone in the comments does know what it is, I will have that pinned down below. Now, the Breath of the Dying is an interesting one because this is probably the single most requested weapon for me to do a video on. However, I do think that goes to show that it's not exactly forgotten. Underused, perhaps, but definitely not forgotten. Of course, though, here I am doing a video on it as I am simply but a whore at the whims of my audience. I also do really like this done and will gladly take the opportunity to talk about it. Breath of the Dying is a fucking incredibly strong weapon. It got that classic BL3 overbuff treatment, though probably even more so than others. Keep in mind with those buffs, because these orbs scale off of the damage dealt for the killing blow, not only was that multiplier directly buffed, but because the damage of the weapon itself was buffed, that on average increases the damage dealt in the killing blow. So this was like overbuffed and then overbuffed in the same buff. It honestly wasn't even just that direct damage increase that made this thing so strong. If it was just that, the Breath of the Dying would be a good assault rifle, but it would really kind of just end there and just be a sort of higher tier assault rifle. But those fucking orbs will evaporate anything that they touch. You can boss with this thing as long as the boss has an enemy near it that you can kill. Like, Breath of the Dying is still a very solid assault rifle for single targets. Though for single targets, it doesn't really offer anything particularly special. Where the Breath of the Dying really shines is when it's being used within huge groups of enemies to immediately wipe them. Speaking of which, watch this clip of Kraken just getting one-tapped out of this fucking plane of existence. Bye-bye, there he goes, never to be seen again.
Heckled, and I said some pretty nasty things to some Afro-Americans.
I think out of the guns to get these random fucking giga buffs that Gearbox did, the Breath of the Dying probably won out the absolute hardest. And honestly, for how hard it did win out, it definitely does still deserve a video here because it is so fucking underused. It probably has something to do with just how strong this thing is. It is very fun to use, but it's kind of like the noob tube of BL3. It does kind of get a little bit boring after a while, just watching everything on your screen disappear because you killed that one guy just right. Though it is definitely worth keeping in mind that these splash damage orbs can and will kill you quite often if you're not careful. So I suppose that's the challenge of using the Breath of the Dying, is just not downing yourself constantly. I am honestly pretty glad to see the Breath of the Dying being here now and getting some attention on it, as this was actually the first legendary weapon I got, having it world drop during my first playthrough during Atlas HQ. So it does hold a bit of a special place in my heart. And while it was never really particularly a bad weapon at any point in the game's life cycle, it being in this stupid strong state is kind of fun. Though it does have a bit of a downside, and it kind of stems from the corrosive lock, which itself doesn't sound like a huge deal. However, when you combine it with the fact that the Breath of the Dying functions like a lot of other on-kill weapons, where the final kill damage has to be from the actual damage of that gun itself. Having that corrosive lock makes it benefit very heavily from bonus elements. However, if you have a bonus element active, as a vast majority of builds probably will, if the damage from one of those elements is what kills, then the effect will not trigger. trigger. This is especially easy to see on Moe's, as in my footage I only really had it trigger a few times. And this is because if you element match the corrosive onto an armor bar, then it'll become more likely for the gun itself to be what deals the killing damage, since it's dealing more damage than your other bonus elements. But there's not very many robot enemies that have an armor bar as their final bar in BL3 aside from a couple specific areas. Which means while technically the Breath of the Dying's effect should trigger after every single kill, it's very unlikely that that's going to happen with a majority of builds. Especially a majority of Moe's builds, because Fire in the Stag Den just does so much fucking fire damage. But overall, the Breath of the Dying is just a stupidly fucking strong and very fun gun to use. It is definitely overpowered, and as such is probably why I think it does go a little bit underused, as just using stupidly broken guns for an extended period of time I feel like does get a little bit old. But I do always love throwing the Breath of the Dying on every once in a while, especially if it's to just watch it do its best Remnant cosplay, and to just have it shit on a fucking boss that I wasn't even looking at. But that's gonna about do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all that. Down in the description will be a link to my Twitch channel where you can follow to be notified of when I go live, and just below that is a link to my Discord server where you can come and join and hang out. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.